Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about the Garibay Blue Wolf overlay, which is a Dungeons and Dragons, which is specifically a way to handle human disbursement within a traditional Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition campaign. Okay, so when I say traditional, I really mean systematized Tolkien, humans, dwarves, elves. If you have a fantasy setting that looks very similar to classic Lord of the Rings, you can use this Garibay Blue Wolf overlay to change human disbursement in a very fundamental way. So traditionally you have villages, towns, and cities. This gets rid of all of those groupings for humans and instead puts in encampments, towers, and castles. And today we're going to talk about encampments and what happens for player characters in encampments and what doesn't. All right. So for each of these three elements in the Garibay Blue Wolf overlay, there is going to be, we're going to talk about miss, monster, item, survivability, and standing for the player characters. All right. So when player characters go into an encampment, okay, first of all, the encampment will be in the middle of a 25-mile area that everyone who lives in the encampment has a very, very low amount of control over. They have now encampments. The people who live in encampments, they affect 25 miles surrounding their encampment. Okay, and essentially, as the moment a player character walks within 25 miles of an encampment, they are under the following miss rules, okay? They have to deal with the monsters, the magic items, the survivability, and the standing elements that they'll encounter, okay? All right, so encampments are literally just collections of tents. They're humans who live in tents together in encampments. Now, why do they live in encampments? Well, the reason why they live in encampments is they don't live near a castle. They don't live within 25 miles of a castle, and they don't live within 25 miles of a wizard tower. Okay, all right. So basically, I'll explain this how this works. Right. So essentially, the encampment is a collection of tents. So there's no buildings, and generally, player characters, the moment they walk within 25 miles of this, let's talk about the monsters. They can encounter any traditional monster in the monster manual. Okay, beasts can roll up on them. Bears can come out and attack them. Snakes can attack them from the ground. They might come across a wormling, right? They might come across a Tarrasque, right? Any type of monster you would traditionally see in the Dungeon Master Guide can be encountered in an encampment. Now, why is that, right? And by the way, roaming monsters are very much can be found within a 25-mile area of an encampment. Well, the reason why is the people who live in encampments, because they're not incredibly well organized, right? And they don't, and they're not, because of the nature of their encampment, they don't have strong security. That's the biggest issue, right? So people who are living in encampments generally have less wealth, right? And they have less ability, and they have less willingness generally to put forward an organized, unified front, okay? And because of that, they're not able to put forward a strong, unified defense, and that means that monsters are frequently able to do whatever they want within an encampment area, okay? All right, magic items. What magic items will a player character encounter that is sourced from the encampment? Well, the answer is 0, none. All right, people who live in encampments don't own magic items. The reason why is magic items are incredibly wealthy, and if the people who live in encampments had the ability to have wealth, they generally would move to a castle area for some reasons. That isn't the case with all people who live in encampments. There are some people who have wealth who live in encampments, but because of the nature of encampments, people who do not have wealth are more than welcome and have every right to live within an encampment. Okay, all right. So that's part of the encampment. Okay, so magic items will be 0. There could be some exceptions. What would be the exception of encountering a magic item within an encampment? Well, where you would encounter a magic item in an encampment is specifically whenever you would encounter an adventurer who is in the 25-mile radius of the encampment, but is just passing through. So they'd be adventurers just like your player characters, right? Because generally your player characters are not going to live in encampment areas, right? Generally, adventurers don't live anywhere. They travel and they're nomadic, right? So basically the only time they would encounter magic items is specifically magic items that are on the person of an adventurer. That's about the only time they would encounter a magic item, okay? Survivability. It is very hard to survive within 25 miles of an encampment, okay? The moment they enter the 25-meter area, they make every single player character makes a survival check, okay? And survival check at a DC 15. If they fail that survival check, they will take 1d4, 1d8, 1d12 damage at the discretion, the full choice of the dungeon master, okay? And why is that? Well, all kinds of reasons, right? They have run out of provisions. Why would they run out of provisions? One reason they might run out of provisions is there are people here who don't have provisions, and if the player characters, make a habit of giving out provisions, they might run out themselves. Provisions can rot because there's less protections here. They're more likely to run into poisonous areas. The water, the air, everything is less clean in the encampment areas than they will find in a tower area or in a castle area, right? So the reality is that's one issue that they can run into, is that they can very much so survivor. The other thing is they could step in a hole, right? They could trip over a log. Trash that is in the encampment area can damage them. They could walk over a glass bottle, all kinds of things like this. So there's lots of survivability hazards. It is on the dungeon master to create the survivability hazard once they fail, and to choose 1d4, 1d8, or 1d12 in damage. Their choice, dungeon master's choice. Okay. Last is standing. What standing does a player character have? An adventurer have in an encampment? Well, here's the good news, because there's a whole bunch of bad news about encampments, right? The good news is they have all the standing they need. They have as much standing as anyone who lives in the encampment. Encampments are open. People can come and go. They can set up a tent. They can stay as long as they want. They can leave whenever they want. Everyone in an encampment has equal rights, right? And those rights are they can retain anything that they have the strength to retain, right? And essentially, there are no lords or ladies. There are no controlling wizards in an encampment. In fact, there's almost never any recognized. There's no leadership recognized at the level of the encampment that spans across the majority of the encampment. That doesn't mean there aren't leaders in an encampment. You will definitely find leaders in an encampment, but no leaders in an encampment that have the goodwill and the unity of even the majority of everyone in the encampment. Okay, so that's the good thing, is they have all the standing they need in an encampment, right? So encampments are very unique. They give some very distinct, specific things that can happen to the player characters. And the reason why we're exploring this is very different than what you would find in a Lord of the Rings type setting. However, while it's different, it allows you to use every traditional Lord of the Rings setting element, which is the core ones, which are humans, dwarves, and elves. Those are load-bearing walls in Dungeons & Dragons. Many, I think most players, if you're missing one of those, they won't even recognize your game as a Dungeons & Dragons game, which I kind of agree with. They were there from the beginning. They're there now. They are traditionally, iconically Dungeons & Dragons. That's the encampment. What are your thoughts on this element of the Garibay Blue Wolf overlay? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.